You dare look at me? She said. I smiled and answered only because you're beautiful the first time Commander Ethan Hale set foot in the Viorlian Grand Summit Hall. He felt the weight of the entire galaxy pressing down on his shoulders. The chamber was unlike anything humans had ever encountered. Towering walls of living metal curved into impossible arcs above him, each surface shifting subtly, reflecting light like liquid silver. The ceiling stretched so high that the top disappeared into shadow, and from somewhere in that darkness, alien voices hummed, almost as if the building itself were alive. The air was heavy, filtered through some unseen system that smelled faintly of ozone and something sweet, a scent that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Humans had been warned that the Viorlians were a species built entirely on hierarchy, intimidation, and fear. Even the smallest misstep in protocol could lead to death or eternal exile. History recorded countless delegations that had bowed, trembled, and whispered to avoid offending the matriarch, the supreme ruler of the Viorlian Empire. Entire species had been eradicated for failing to show the proper level of deference. Now Ethan, a mere human, had been chosen to stand in their midst, not as a subordinate, not as a diplomat in the usual sense, but as a symbol that humanity would no longer bow to intimidation alone. He walked slowly, deliberately, flanked by a small contingent of human envoys. His uniform was impeccable, tailored to signal authority without arrogance. His boots clicked softly against the polished floor, and he noticed the alien guards, six-limbed beings with black, reflective carapaces, shift nervously as he passed. The matriarch's chamber was vast, her throne raised far above the floor, an intricate construct of bone-like material intertwined with glowing veins of energy. She waited in complete silence, her four eyes, each larger than a human fist, fixed on the human delegation. Most humans instinctively lowered their gazes. It was not just custom, it was survival. Avoiding eye contact was a sign of respect or fear depending on perspective. Every other species had fallen into this pattern, submissive and trembling, but Ethan did not bow. He did not avert his eyes. He walked forward with steady confidence, shoulders square, eyes meeting hers. The room grew still. Even the shifting walls seemed to hold their breath. The matriarch's voice, when it finally came, cut through the chamber like a sharp blade. It was melodic yet cruel, a sound that could both charm and terrify simultaneously. "You dare look at me?" she asked. Each word resonated in the air, vibrating like a low hum, and Ethan felt its weight as though it were pressing down on him. There was a moment of silence. Ethan could hear the faint creaking of the throne as the matriarch shifted slightly, her multiple eyes narrowing. The guards tensed, their limbs moving almost involuntarily toward their weapons. Human envoys froze, hands clutching the hilts of concealed sidearms. History had taught them all what usually happened in these moments, and fear rippled through the room like electricity. Ethan smiled. It was a calm, almost gentle smile, not mocking, not arrogant, not hesitant. It was a smile that acknowledged the moment without submitting to it. The room went colder. The Viorlian advisors whispered urgently to each other, the language flowing like a rapid river of clicking and tonal vibrations, but none dared raise their voices to interrupt. "I look at you only because you are beautiful," Ethan said, his voice steady, clear, and firm. He did not bow, did not stammer. He simply met her gaze and spoke what humans would call the truth. A shockwave of confusion swept across the chamber. The matriarch's eyes widened, a flicker of something unfamiliar passing over her expression. Outrage, perhaps, or disbelief. In Viorlian culture, no one had ever spoken so boldly, so openly, without fear. Compliments, especially directed at a ruler, were unheard of, considered dangerous and subversive. Yet Ethan did not waver. The matriarch rose slowly, her massive form filling the throne's platform, her energy veins pulsing brighter with every movement. The room's temperature seemed to drop, or perhaps it was the sudden intensity of her presence. "Explain," she commanded, her voice simultaneously demanding and curious. "Why would you, a human, risk your life with such insolence?" Ethan took a measured breath, aware that every second counted. "Because," he began, his tone calm but confident, "among my people, looking someone in the eye is not a challenge. It is honesty. Speaking what we feel is not disrespect, it is respect. To see beauty and acknowledge it is a gesture of truth, not submission. I do not fear you, but I also do not wish to insult you. I only wish to speak as I am." The matriarch tilted her head slightly, a motion that seemed almost human in its subtlety. Her advisors murmured in growing alarm. Some shook their heads, others stared, unable to comprehend why a human would act in this way. Guards adjusted their weapons, unsure whether to intervene. In their eyes, Ethan was tempting fate, flirting with death. Despite the tension, the matriarch remained silent for a long moment. It was as if she were weighing his words against centuries of tradition, against the lessons her empire had drilled into her from birth. Finally, she spoke again, softer this time, though no less commanding. "You are fearless, little human, or perhaps foolish. Your people must have survived by stupidity, for no species could endure in the galaxy without cunning or obedience." Ethan's smile did not falter. "No," he said simply. "We survive because we endure, because we face challenges without letting fear decide our actions. We make choices not based on intimidation but on truth and reason. Fear is temporary, respect is lasting." Something shifted in the chamber. Even the living walls seemed to shimmer differently, a subtle acknowledgement of the human presence. The guards relaxed slightly, though their hands remained near their weapons. The advisors leaned closer to one another, whispering urgent arguments about how to respond. No consensus was reached. The matriarch's multiple eyes lingered on Ethan. She sensed something she had never experienced before: honesty that did not bend, courage that did not threaten, and a strange form of strength that arose from serenity rather than domination. The concept was alien and yet compelling. Minutes passed. No one moved, and the silence became a presence itself, heavy and charged. Finally, the matriarch spoke again, this time a single word: "Stay." Ethan blinked, surprised. The word carried no warmth, no promise of friendship, but it was not an execution order either. "Stay," she repeated, louder this time, as if testing both herself and him. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the command. To the human delegates, it was a simple act of obedience, but to the Viorlians, it was a shocking reversal of protocol. No outsider had ever been granted the right to remain in the matriarch's presence without immediate subjugation. The human delegation exhaled collectively, tension leaving their bodies like a gust of wind. Ethan remained standing, eyes still locked with hers, holding his ground as though the weight of history rested upon his shoulders and he would not yield. Over the next several hours, Ethan was questioned by the matriarch herself, a private audience that no human or alien had ever experienced. He spoke plainly, answering questions about humanity's history, our motivations, our desires, and our fears. Each answer was met with curiosity, suspicion, or disbelief. Yet he never faltered. His presence alone began to sow seeds of doubt among the Viorlians, challenging assumptions that had ruled their empire for centuries. When the audience ended, Ethan was allowed to leave the chamber. The matriarch did not smile, nor did she nod. She simply watched as the humans exited, her gaze lingering in a way that suggested thought, consideration, and perhaps even unease. Rumors would later swirl among Viorlian elites about the human who dared to smile and speak freely in the presence of a matriarch. Rumors that would be whispered for years. That night in their temporary quarters aboard the Viorlian orbital station, Ethan reflected on the day's events. He understood the danger he had walked into, the thin line between respect and death. Yet he also knew that something fundamental had shifted. The matriarch had seen him, truly seen him, not as a subordinate, not as a curiosity, but as an equal human being. And in that acknowledgement, he sensed the first hint of opportunity, not just for himself, but for humanity's place in the galaxy. Every human in the delegation slept uneasily, aware that the next day would bring either reward or retribution. But Ethan felt a quiet confidence, the kind that humans had cultivated for millennia. The knowledge that courage, honesty, and the willingness to meet fear head-on could change even the course of history. And in the quiet shadows of the Viorlian Empire, a seed was planted. A seed that, if nurtured wisely, might one day grow into something far greater than any one human could imagine. Even as he drifted into a light sleep, the final thought that crossed his mind was not of fear, but of determination. Humanity had been underestimated, feared, and overlooked by countless alien civilizations. But in this moment, in this encounter, Ethan realized something profound. The galaxy had never seen humanity as it truly was, fearless, clever, and capable of challenging the mightiest rulers not through force, but through the quiet power of character, courage, and truth. And that was just the beginning. The next morning, the Virelian Grand Summit Hall buzzed with a tension that humans could feel in their bones. News of Commander Ethan Hale's defiance had spread quickly among the alien delegates. Whispers ran like electric currents through the chamber, vibrating through the walls which seemed to pulse in response. The advisors' voices carried urgency, fear, and disbelief. For centuries, the matriarch's rule had been absolute, her authority unchallenged. And yet here stood a human who had not bowed, who had met her gaze and worse, had spoken as an equal. Ethan entered the chamber again, accompanied by his team of human envoys. Unlike the first day, he was prepared for stares, for whispers, for the subtle hostility that permeated the air. He moved steadily, deliberately keeping his posture calm and open. His eyes scanned the vast hall, noting the shifting patterns of the living walls, the silent guards, and the council members seated around the platform of the matriarch. None of them had expected him to return. The matriarch observed him from her throne, her multiple eyes narrowing and widening with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Her glowing energy veins pulsed faintly, a visible indicator of her attention. Today, she did not speak immediately. She waited, letting the humans settle, allowing the silence to amplify. Ethan held her gaze without fear, and the subtle power of his quiet confidence filled the space. Finally, her voice cut through the room, melodic but dangerous. "You return, little human. Do you not fear your life? Do you not fear my wrath?" Ethan smiled slightly. "I do not fear you," he said, his voice steady. "I respect you, but fear is not respect and submission is not truth. I come because there is a chance for understanding, not conflict." A murmur ran through the Virelian Council. Some advisors shook their heads, their long tendrils twitching nervously. Others leaned forward, intrigued despite themselves. Humans were strange, fearless but not reckless, bold yet careful. They did not follow Virelian protocol, and that made them unpredictable. And in a world ruled by fear, unpredictability was dangerous. "You speak as if your people have survived for millennia through honesty and courage alone," the matriarch said, her voice sharp, each word deliberate. "Tell me, human, how can such fragile creatures endure in a galaxy ruled by strength and cunning?" Ethan did not hesitate. "Because our strength is not just in our bodies or our weapons," he said. "It is in our minds, our will, our ability to think, to adapt, and to endure. We face threats without letting fear control us. We cooperate, we learn, and we protect each other. That is how humanity survives." The matriarch's expression remained unreadable. The humans noticed how her glowing veins pulsed faster with every word, a subtle rhythm that indicated agitation, or perhaps fascination. The human envoy team shifted nervously, aware that the next words could decide life or death. But Ethan remained calm. He had prepared for this, not with weapons or force, but with conviction, clarity, and the simplest of human truths. Over the next several hours, the humans answered question after question. They spoke of Earth's history, of wars fought and survived, of alliances forged and broken, and of the human drive to endure against impossible odds. The Virelians listened, sometimes interrupting with sharp questions, sometimes murmuring among themselves in disbelief. They could not understand how a species so small, so physically weak, could have survived and thrived without the rigid hierarchies and fear-based control that defined their own civilization. At one point, the matriarch leaned forward, her multiple eyes fixed on Ethan. "You speak of courage, but courage is fleeting. It can be broken with the right threat. How can you claim that your species is strong when the galaxy itself is a place of predators?" Ethan's gaze did not waver. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he said. "It is the choice to act despite fear. We make decisions based on reason, strategy, and morality, not intimidation. That is what makes humans strong, and it is why we endure when others fail." The room fell silent again. Even the guards seemed to pause, unsure whether to react. The advisors whispered urgently, debating how to respond. Some argued that the human must be executed for insolence. Others suggested observing him further, as his behavior could not be ignored. During the discussion, Ethan noticed subtle details about the Virelians that most humans would have overlooked. Their species was elegant, dangerous, and methodical, yet bound by fear of hierarchy and tradition. They had no concept of honesty without self-interest, no experience with respect not born of submission. Every reaction, every hesitation, every twitch of the matriarch's energy veins revealed layers of curiosity, uncertainty, and perhaps admiration. By midday, the matriarch finally spoke again. "You challenge our traditions simply by existing in our presence and speaking freely. Why should I not consider your people a threat?" Ethan responded with calm conviction. "Because we do not seek to dominate others for the sake of power. We seek understanding, cooperation, and survival. We are a species that thrives not by fear, but by courage, ingenuity, and perseverance. Those who underestimate us risk discovering that strength comes in many forms, not just brute force or intimidation." The matriarch's advisors gasped softly. None had ever heard a human speak with such clarity and confidence. Some whispered to one another, debating whether this small species might be more dangerous than any weapon. The human did not flinch. He did not bow. He did not yield. He simply spoke as he believed. Later, in a private moment, Ethan was allowed to walk through the observation galleries of the summit hall. He noted the alien art, the intricate machinery, and the way the Viorlians moved through the space with calculated precision. They were efficient, intelligent, and deadly, but also trapped, confined by fear, by tradition, by centuries of rules designed to control rather than inspire. He realized then that humanity's greatest advantage was not technology, not numbers, not weapons. It was adaptability, ingenuity, and the refusal to be intimidated. Where the Viorlians saw threats, humans saw opportunities. Where they saw rules, humans saw choices. Where they saw fear, humans saw motivation. Ethan's team reconvened in the human quarters aboard the orbital station. They discussed the day's events, analyzing every exchange, every reaction. While some envoys were uneasy about the boldness of Ethan's approach, all agreed on one undeniable fact. Humans had made an impact the likes of which no alien species had anticipated. The matriarch herself had been affected. She had been forced to see humanity in a light her empire had never considered. That evening, the matriarch summoned Ethan again. The chamber was quieter this time, the living walls seeming to pulse with anticipation rather than intimidation. She studied him, her multiple eyes reflecting curiosity and perhaps an unfamiliar hint of respect. "Human," she said finally, "your people are strange. You are fearless yet thoughtful, bold yet measured. I do not know if you are wise or foolish, but your presence disturbs the balance of power in ways I cannot yet calculate." Ethan bowed slightly, acknowledging her words without submission. "I come not to disturb your majesty, but to show that humans can coexist, learn, and contribute. Fear is temporary, cooperation lasts." The matriarch did not respond immediately. Instead, she observed him for a long, silent moment. In that pause, Ethan sensed something incredible, a moment of hesitation, a crack in the armor of centuries of tradition. Perhaps she had never been spoken to in this way, or perhaps she had never been truly seen before. Whatever it was powerful. By the end of the day, the council remained divided. Some advisors called for strict punishment. Others urged caution. None could deny that humanity had introduced an unpredictable element into the political landscape. The matriarch, however, made a decision that would shock both allies and enemies alike. She allowed Ethan and his delegation to remain within the orbital station, observing, conversing, and influencing only as much as she permitted. It was not a reward, it was a test. A test that humans had passed simply by being themselves. As the human team gathered to review their experience, Ethan reflected on the significance of their encounter. The matriarch's empire was vast, powerful, and dangerous. Yet her people were trapped by fear, their minds limited by rules and hierarchy. Humanity, on the other hand, thrived because it refused to be constrained. This understanding was the first step in changing not just the matriarch's perception, but potentially the course of galactic history. That night, Ethan stared out of the viewport at the endless expanse of stars. He thought of Earth, of humanity's struggles and triumphs, of the countless times humans had survived against impossible odds. And he understood something fundamental. Courage and honesty could unsettle even the most powerful rulers. Fearless humanity could challenge the galaxy not with weapons alone, but with principles, wit, and the refusal to bow to intimidation. As the orbital station rotated silently around the Viorlian homeworld, Ethan felt a quiet confidence. Humanity had been underestimated, feared, and dismissed by countless civilizations. Yet here they were, standing unbowed before the matriarch, their courage and clarity beginning to ripple through an empire built on fear. And that was only the beginning. Somewhere deep in the Virelian hierarchy, advisors whispered that humans could never survive. Yet the matriarch herself seemed to hesitate, uncertain, almost reflective. Ethan realized that the galaxy had not yet measured the true impact of humanity. They had not yet seen how bold, clever, and fearless humans could truly be. And in that moment he smiled, not in arrogance, not in defiance, but in quiet recognition of the path ahead. The journey would be dangerous, the consequences uncertain, but the human spirit had always endured. It had always adapted. And now, standing on the edge of an alien empire, humanity was about to be seen in a way it had never been before. Not as prey, not as a curiosity, but as equals capable of changing the galaxy itself. Weeks had passed since the human delegation first met the Virelian matriarch. And the calm that seemed to follow their initial encounter was only an illusion. Rumors swirled through the corridors of the Virelian orbital station, whispers of the strange human who dared to smile and speak without fear. Some advisors warned that the human could destabilize centuries of order. Others, though fewer, admitted they were curious about his audacity. The matriarch herself remained an enigma, observing both humans and her own council with a mix of caution and fascination. Ethan Hale spent those weeks learning more about the Virelian Empire than any human had ever dared. He studied their systems, their technology, their culture, and their weaknesses, not to exploit them but to understand. Humanity had survived because it could adapt, and he intended to apply that same principle here. He noticed how the Virelians obeyed hierarchy without question, how fear controlled their decision-making, and how tradition prevented them from considering alternatives. It was an empire of intelligence shackled by its own rules, brilliant and dangerous, yet vulnerable in ways no weapon could exploit directly. One evening, the alarms of the orbital station shattered the relative calm. Red lights flashed across the walls, and the deep hum of the station's energy systems intensified. The human envoys and Virelian guards alike scrambled to their stations. Reports came in quickly. A coalition of alien empires, long rivals of the Virelians, had mobilized fleets and were heading toward Virelian space. The sheer size and speed of their approach left little doubt. They intended to strike decisively and test the Empire's strength. The matriarch convened her council immediately. Hushed voices filled the chamber as advisors proposed immediate counterattacks, strategies relying on overwhelming force, intimidation, and swift retaliation. Ethan observed silently, noting patterns in their thinking. Predictable, he thought. Their instinct was fear-driven, reactionary. That was both their strength and their weakness. They were efficient when commanding obedience, but limited when creativity or subtlety was required. When the council called for Ethan's input, many advisors reacted with open hostility. A human had no experience in war, they argued, and his perspective could only endanger the Empire. The matriarch, however, surprised them all. She allowed him to speak, granting him a voice in the council despite centuries of precedent. Ethan took a deep breath and began. Your fleets are strong, but predictability is your weakness. Your enemy expects you to react with force, to mirror aggression with aggression. They assume fear will control you. I suggest a different approach. Withdraw strategically, disrupt their supply lines, mislead their commanders, and use their confidence against them. A direct fight will cost countless lives and resources. A calculated strategy can achieve victory without unnecessary destruction. The room fell silent. Some advisors scoffed openly, unable to imagine retreat as a form of strategy. Others whispered among themselves, considering the logic behind his words. The matriarch studied Ethan closely, her multiple eyes narrowing and widening as she weighed his plan. You suggest deception, patience, and endurance instead of immediate power, she said finally. Explain why you believe humans can endure what empires cannot. Ethan met her gaze steadily. Because we survive not by strength alone, but by adaptability, cooperation, and intelligence. We anticipate threats, exploit weaknesses, and endure challenges that might break others. You fear aggression. We embrace possibility. That difference is why humans thrive. The matriarch leaned back slightly, her glowing energy veins pulsing rhythmically. Her advisors whispered urgently, debating the implications of his words. Some feared the human was manipulating her. Others began to wonder if he truly understood the art of war better than anyone in the room. The fact that she considered his perspective at all was unprecedented. In the following days, the Violins watched as their enemy fleet advanced. Ethan's strategy was clear: patience and misdirection. Under his guidance, the Violin fleets repositioned silently, avoiding detection and creating false signals to mislead the approaching coalition. Communications were scrambled, sensor readings falsified, and decoy ships moved in patterns designed to confuse enemy reconnaissance. Every move was calculated, and every decision was rooted in human ingenuity rather than brute force. As the enemy closed in, tension gripped the station. Violin advisors argued constantly, some demanding immediate retaliation, others suggesting preemptive strikes. Ethan calmly reviewed intelligence reports, cross-referencing them with human tactics and historical outcomes. He began to issue instructions, carefully phrased and precise, that leveraged the Violins' strengths while minimizing predictable behavior. The first encounters occurred in the outer systems. Enemy scouts approached what they believed to be unprotected supply lines. Instead, they were met with subtle traps, fleets that appeared weaker than they were, and signals suggesting vulnerability that did not exist. Ships were disabled without loss of life, and enemy commanders began to doubt their own calculations. Back at the orbital station, the matriarch observed Ethan as he guided the operations. She could not deny the effectiveness of his strategies, though she refused to admit it openly. His calm, measured demeanor contrasted sharply with the fear-driven decisions of her advisors. Even now, centuries of training and tradition made it difficult for her to fully embrace his methods, yet she could not ignore the results. One night, while monitoring the tactical situation, Ethan was summoned to the matriarch's private chamber. She regarded him silently, her multiple eyes reflecting both curiosity and the faintest trace of admiration. "You are not a warrior in the conventional sense," she said, "yet you have turned a confrontation that could have destroyed my empire into an opportunity." "How do you do this?" Ethan shrugged lightly, not as a gesture of disrespect, but as a human way of acknowledging simplicity. "I observe, I think, and I act without letting fear decide for me. The galaxy is full of rules that limit perspective. I do not ignore rules, I understand them and choose how to use them." The matriarch studied him for a long moment. She had been trained to lead through intimidation, to command respect through fear. Yet here was a human, a mere outsider who had taught her empire to act in ways they had never considered. It was unsettling, yet undeniably effective. Meanwhile, the war in the outer systems escalated. The coalition launched a full-scale assault on what they believed were the heart of Violin defenses. Instead, they encountered ambushes, misdirections, and coordinated attacks that shattered their formations. Human ingenuity, combined with Violin firepower, created outcomes that the enemy could not anticipate. Every maneuver, every adjustment, every decision was a test of strategy, patience, and observation. In the heat of battle, the matriarch herself took notice of the subtle changes among her own people. Soldiers moved with more confidence, commanders acted with initiative, and even advisors began to listen rather than dictate. The presence of humans, and their unwavering composure, was inspiring a level of morale the Violin Empire had not seen in centuries. As the days continued, enemy losses mounted. The coalition began to retreat, their confidence shaken, their commanders doubting their own intelligence. They had underestimated the Violins, but more importantly, they had underestimated humanity. The small, seemingly fragile species had introduced strategies that no one in the galaxy had anticipated. They had changed the battlefield simply by thinking differently. During a brief lull, the matriarch approached Ethan once more. "You have changed my perception," she admitted, her voice lower than usual. "I did not expect humans to possess such resilience and cunning. Your presence forces me to consider possibilities I have ignored for centuries." Ethan nodded respectfully. "We do not seek to dominate, Your Majesty. We only act according to what is necessary, what is right, and what ensures survival. Strength is more than force. It is foresight, creativity, and courage." The matriarch's eyes softened slightly, though still glowing with intensity. "You speak of courage as though it is a weapon. Perhaps it is. Perhaps it is the most dangerous weapon of all." In the following days, the coalition forces withdrew entirely, unable to comprehend how their overwhelming fleets had been so effectively countered. Across the galaxy, word spread of the Virealian victory, though the details were scarce. Rumors circulated about a human strategist whose insights had turned the tide of battle. Whispers suggested that this small species, previously dismissed, had altered the balance of power in ways that would be remembered for generations. Back on the orbital station, the atmosphere among the humans and Virealians shifted subtly. Mutual respect began to emerge where suspicion had dominated. The matriarch, once untouchable and feared, now appeared to consider the humans not as subordinates, but as partners in thought, if not in authority. Ethan and his team understood the significance of this transformation. Humanity had not only survived in an alien empire, it had reshaped it through intelligence, strategy, and fearlessness. As Part 3 of their encounter drew to a close, Ethan reflected quietly on the journey so far. The Virealians had learned that strength was not always shown through power, that obedience was not always the key to survival, and that fear could be countered with clarity, courage, and insight. Humans, too, had learned that even in the midst of an alien empire, their principles, honesty, respect, adaptability, could command attention, influence outcomes, and inspire change. Ethan knew the challenges were far from over. The galaxy was vast and threats remained. But humanity had demonstrated a truth that could not be ignored. Bravery, intelligence, and resilience could shape events in ways that brute force never could. And in doing so, humans had begun to prove what generations of speculation had hinted at, but no one had truly believed. They were a species to be reckoned with, not for their strength, but for the enduring power of their spirit. As the orbital station rotated silently around the Virealian homeworld, Ethan gazed out at the stars. Somewhere in the vast expanse of space, other civilizations were watching, wondering how such a small species could challenge the greatest empire in the galaxy. They had underestimated humans once, and it had nearly cost them. Ethan smiled quietly to himself. The galaxy was beginning to see humanity for what it truly was: clever, courageous, and unstoppable in ways that could not be measured by weapons alone. The real battle, he knew, was not over ships or fleets. It was over perception, over recognition, and over the ability to change the minds of those who believed power was everything. And in that quiet moment, Commander Ethan Hale understood that the human race had begun a transformation that would ripple through the galaxy for generations. They had not only survived, they had influenced history itself, not through domination, but through the indomitable power of thought, courage, and the unwavering spirit of humanity. The galaxy seemed to hold its breath as the final stage of the conflict approached. The Virealian fleet, under the quiet guidance of Commander Ethan Hale, had regrouped and strengthened its positions after the enemy's initial retreat. Yet the coalition of rival empires had not given up. Their commanders were intelligent, ruthless, and now driven by pride and vengeance. They believed that a single overwhelming strike could shatter the Virealian Empire once and for all. Ethan and his human team were summoned to the matriarch's council chamber, a room that now seemed less intimidating than it had weeks ago. The matriarch herself had grown accustomed to the human presence, though she still maintained the authority that made her feared across countless systems. She regarded Ethan with her multiple eyes, the energy veins along her skin pulsing with both tension and anticipation. "The enemy returns," she said, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. "They are stronger, more prepared, and aware of some of our previous movements. They will strike with everything they have. I want your guidance, human. How do we ensure victory?" Ethan stepped forward, calm despite the looming danger. "We do not meet them head-on," he said. "Their confidence makes them predictable. We create an illusion of vulnerability, draw them in, and then use their aggression against them. Their strength is their arrogance. We will turn it into our weakness." The matriarch's advisors tensed at the suggestion. Retreating from a direct fight, even strategically, was unheard of. Some whispered that the human was reckless, yet others recognized the logic in his words. The matriarch studied Ethan carefully, her expression unreadable. After a long pause, she gave a subtle nod. "Then it is your strategy. You will guide our forces." Over the next days, the Virealian fleets executed Ethan's plans with precision. Human tactics combined with Virealian technology created patterns that were both sophisticated and unpredictable. False signals, decoy ships, and controlled retreats lured the coalition deeper into Virealian space. Every maneuver was calculated to manipulate the enemy's expectations, forcing them to make mistakes while overestimating their advantage. As the enemy entered what they believed to be weak positions, Virelian forces, hidden in previously unnoticed sectors, struck with perfect timing. Ships that had appeared vulnerable suddenly revealed overwhelming firepower, disabling entire squadrons of enemy craft before they could react. Communications had been intercepted and manipulated, causing confusion among coalition commanders. Every misstep was orchestrated, every move designed to maximize efficiency while minimizing loss of life. Ethan monitored the battlefield from the orbital station, coordinating actions with a clarity born of experience and intuition. He did not panic, even when unexpected complications arose. Instead, he adapted, finding solutions where others saw only crisis. His calm presence reassured the Virelian commanders, giving them confidence to act boldly rather than out of fear. In the midst of the battle, the matriarch observed from her throne, noting changes in her own people. Soldiers acted with initiative, commanders issued orders with strategic flexibility, and even advisors who had doubted humanity's methods began to defer to Ethan's guidance. The Empire's morale had shifted. Fear no longer dictated actions. Respect, courage, and confidence now drove decisions. The enemy, however, was relentless. They unleashed massive assaults on the Virelian front lines, testing every maneuver, probing for weaknesses. Ethan's strategies held, but he knew that the outcome would depend on timing, precision, and the ability to predict enemy reactions. He issued orders with a calm authority that belied the high stakes, coordinating fleet movements, decoy activations, and targeted strikes that systematically dismantled the coalition's confidence. As the battle intensified, the matriarch found herself personally involved in key operations. She had learned to trust Ethan's judgment, yet she also brought her own expertise to the fight. Together, human intuition and Virelian precision created a synergy that the coalition could not anticipate. Every advance by the enemy was met with countermeasures that seemed to anticipate their every move, and every retreat was designed to draw them deeper into controlled traps. During a critical moment, the coalition's flagship broke formation and attempted a direct assault on the Virelian command center. Ethan quickly calculated the odds and issued orders to lure the flagship into an isolated sector. There, hidden Virelian forces and precise human-led maneuvers cornered the ship. The flagship was disabled without catastrophic destruction, a calculated strike that preserved lives while eliminating the immediate threat. The matriarch watched in silent awe as the strategy unfolded. She realized that the humans' approach was not just effective, it was revolutionary. For centuries, her empire had relied on power and intimidation. Now, strategy, patience, and calculated risk had proven far more effective. The galaxy had been measuring strength incorrectly all along. As the enemy began to recognize the futility of their attacks, disarray spread through their fleets. Confusion, frustration, and doubt replaced confidence. Coalition commanders began blaming one another for failures, issuing orders too late or in the wrong direction. Every moment of hesitation was exploited by the combined human Virelian forces, turning the tide decisively in favor of the defenders. In the command chamber, Ethan and the matriarch coordinated the final phase of the battle. He directed Virelian fleets with precise timing, creating controlled chokepoints and channeling enemy forces into traps. Each decision reflected human ingenuity, yet relied on Virelian technological superiority to execute flawlessly. The result was overwhelming. Enemy fleets were immobilized, isolated, and eventually forced into surrender or retreat. When the battle ended, the Virelian Empire had achieved a stunning victory without massive casualties. The coalition, once confident in its overwhelming force, had been outmaneuvered at every turn. Across the galaxy, the outcome sent shockwaves. A human strategist had not only survived within the Virelian Empire, but had led it to triumph against superior forces. The matriarch called a private audience with Ethan. She regarded him with a mixture of awe, respect, and something she had not felt in centuries, curiosity. "You have changed the way I see power," she said, her voice measured but sincere. "Your people are not strong because of fear, weapons, or numbers. You are strong because you act with clarity, courage, and ingenuity. You have shown me something I never expected to see. Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Strength is not always obvious. True strength is endurance, creativity, and courage. It is the ability to face challenges and find solutions where others see only threats. That is why humanity survives, and why your empire succeeded today. The matriarch's advisors were silent during the exchange, realizing that centuries of tradition had been challenged, and in some ways proven less effective than the human methods. For the first time, some began to question their assumptions, considering that fear-driven obedience might not always yield the best results. In the aftermath of the battle, the Viorlian Empire began to reorganize internally. Morale was high, confidence was restored, and new strategies were adopted that incorporated human insight. Soldiers and commanders spoke quietly among themselves, recognizing that the smallest species in the galaxy had made the difference between victory and potential defeat. Ethan and his team continued to advise the matriarch, helping refine plans for future stability and security. The human presence had shifted the internal culture of the empire subtly but profoundly. Fear was no longer the sole motivator. Respect, courage, and intelligence began to guide decisions. The empire was stronger not only because it had won a battle, but because it had learned a new way to think. Late one evening, Ethan observed the stars from the station's observation deck. The galaxy stretched endlessly, filled with civilizations that underestimated humanity at their own peril. He reflected on the journey so far, recognizing that each challenge had tested not only his skills, but the fundamental principles of human resilience. By standing firm, thinking clearly, and acting decisively, humans had proven that strength could take many forms, some far more powerful than brute force. The matriarch entered silently, her multiple eyes reflecting the starlight. She did not need to speak to convey recognition. Her presence alone was an acknowledgement of the bond formed through shared strategy, risk, and victory. Finally, she said, "Your people have taught me that courage and intelligence can accomplish what fear cannot." This lesson will not be forgotten. Ethan smiled slightly. It is only the beginning. Humanity's strength is in the choices we make, the risks we take, and the principles we hold. It is not in weapons or dominance, but in enduring and adapting. That is how we survive and thrive. For the first time, the matriarch allowed herself to consider that humans were not just guests or curiosities. They were partners in thought, capable of shaping outcomes in ways no other species had achieved. She understood that their presence in her empire had already begun a transformation, one that would ripple through political, military, and cultural spheres for generations. As the Viorlian Empire celebrated its victory, Ethan quietly reflected on the implications. The battle had been won, but the war for influence, understanding, and mutual respect had only just begun. The galaxy would continue to test humanity, but he knew that they had proven a crucial truth. Courage, ingenuity, and steadfastness could overcome fear, arrogance, and brute force. And in that quiet reflection, surrounded by stars and the hum of a victorious empire, Ethan realized that the real conquest was not of territory, not of fleets, not even of allies. It was the conquest of perception. Humanity had shown that even in a universe ruled by intimidation and power, the smallest species could alter the course of history simply by standing firm, thinking clearly, and daring to act with courage. The galaxy had seen a glimpse of what humans were capable of. It had not yet comprehended the full measure of their resolve, and as Ethan gazed outward, he understood that the next chapter would be even more challenging, more complex, and more decisive. But humanity was ready. They had proven that fear could be met with resolve, that strategy could triumph over aggression, and that the human spirit was a force that even the most powerful empires could not ignore. Victory was theirs today. Tomorrow, the galaxy would see what it truly meant to underestimate humanity. The galaxy had never been quieter or more uncertain. The battle was over, the coalition fleets had retreated, and the Viorlian Empire stood victorious. Yet victory brought not only relief, but reflection, change, and the weight of understanding that the universe itself had witnessed something unprecedented. The humans had done more than survive. They had reshaped the way one of the most powerful empires in existence perceived strength, leadership, and courage. Commander Ethan Hale walked through the corridors of the orbital station, now filled with a quieter energy. Soldiers moved with purpose rather than fear, and commanders issued orders based on strategy and observation rather than intimidation. The change was subtle but unmistakable. The matriarch's influence remained strong, but the fear that had once dominated her empire had begun to fade. Respect, consideration, and intelligence were taking root in its place. Ethan's thoughts drifted to the humans under his command. They had survived countless dangers, navigated a strange and often hostile culture, and contributed to a victory that no human could have imagined before leaving Earth. Their courage, patience, and ingenuity had proven that humanity's power did not lie solely in weapons, ships, or technology, but in thought, cooperation, and unwavering resolve. The matriarch summoned him once more to the council chamber. This time, the room felt different. There was a subtle shift in atmosphere, a quiet acknowledgement of achievement, and a sense of curiosity rather than suspicion. The advisors remained tense, as was expected, but even they could not conceal a grudging respect. They had witnessed a human change the course of events without dominance, intimidation, or threats. "You have done what none of my empire's finest have achieved in centuries," the matriarch said, her voice steady but carrying a rare warmth. "You have guided us to victory, preserved countless lives, and altered the very way we think about power. Tell me, human, why do your people act this way?" Ethan considered his response carefully, aware of the significance of his words. "We act because we choose to. We face challenges without letting fear decide our actions. We respect life, we value understanding, and we make decisions based on reason and principle rather than submission or intimidation. That is how we survive and how we thrive." The matriarch's eyes, multiple and glowing, studied him as if searching for deception but found none. There was honesty in his gaze, courage in his voice, and clarity in his mind. For centuries, she had relied on fear and hierarchy to maintain control. Yet here was a species that had never bowed, yet had achieved something she herself could not have accomplished with centuries of rule. As days turned into weeks, the empire began to adopt subtle changes inspired by human strategy. Soldiers were trained not only in obedience, but in initiative. Commanders were encouraged to think critically rather than blindly follow orders. Policies that had been rigid for centuries were reconsidered, adjusted, or removed entirely. The ripple effect of human influence spread throughout the Virelian hierarchy, quiet but undeniable. Ethan watched as the matriarch met with her council, listening carefully to suggestions and considering alternatives she would have dismissed before. Her decisions now incorporated foresight, patience, and adaptability, the hallmarks of human strategy. Even her tone softened, though authority remained intact. The advisors whispered among themselves, noting the subtle transformation in both the matriarch and the empire itself. During this time, humans and Virelians alike began to learn from one another. The humans taught techniques of strategy, negotiation, and resilience. In turn, the Virelians shared technological advancements, tactical precision, and insights into interstellar diplomacy. The exchange was unprecedented, a bridge between species built on trust, courage, and mutual respect rather than fear or domination. Ethan found himself reflecting on the journey from the moment he first entered the matriarch's chamber. He remembered the first day when he met her gaze and smiled, choosing honesty over submission. That single moment had initiated a chain reaction, altering not only the matriarch's perception, but the mindset of an entire empire. He realized then that true power did not come from fear or weapons, but from the courage to act according to one's principles, no matter the risks. The matriarch summoned Ethan one final time, alone this time in her private observation chamber. She regarded him with an intensity that was almost human in its depth. "You have shown me that a small species, underestimated and dismissed, can alter the course of events in ways I could not have imagined," she said. "I see now that strength is not always visible, that fear is not always control, and that courage can shape the galaxy itself. You have changed my empire, human, in ways that words cannot capture." Ethan nodded respectfully. "It is only the beginning, Your Majesty. Humanity's strength is in our choices, our principles, and our determination. We survive by adapting, by acting with courage, and by seeking understanding. That is what makes us formidable, not our weapons, not our fleets, but our spirit." The matriarch's multiple eyes softened, the glow dimming slightly as if reflecting contemplation rather than judgment. "Then your people are unlike any I have ever encountered," she said quietly. "They do not seek dominion, yet they command attention. They do not threaten, yet they inspire. Perhaps that is the true measure of strength." Ethan smiled. "It is, and it is not unique to me or my team. Every human has that potential. We survive because we act, not because we intimidate. We endure because we do not let fear control our choices. That is why humanity thrives." Across the empire, changes began to take hold that would resonate for generations. Military protocols were adjusted, training emphasized initiative alongside discipline, and leaders learned to value strategy over intimidation. The empire's citizens, once bound by fear, began to see opportunity, cooperation, and innovation as paths to success. The ripple effect of humanity's presence was profound, transforming not only immediate tactics, but the very philosophy of leadership and power. Meanwhile, news of the Virelian victory spread across neighboring star systems. Other civilizations that had previously dismissed humanity now observed with caution and curiosity. The humans had proven that their power did not lie in overwhelming force or ruthless conquest, but in intelligence, courage, and adaptability. The galaxy began to recognize that underestimating humanity could have consequences far beyond what any species had previously imagined. Back aboard the orbital station, Ethan convened with his team. They reviewed lessons learned, strategies applied, and the long-term implications of their actions. The humans understood that their mission had evolved. They had not only survived in a foreign empire, they had changed it. The principles that had guided them, honesty, courage, adaptability, had demonstrated the true measure of human strength. One evening, as the stars stretched endlessly beyond the observation deck, Ethan reflected on the journey from the first meeting with the matriarch. He remembered the moment he smiled and spoke honestly, the ripple of uncertainty it created, and the eventual respect and cooperation that followed. Humanity had faced fear, alien culture, and the unknown, and emerged not just intact, but influential. The matriarch entered silently, standing beside him as they both looked out at the galaxy. "Your people are extraordinary," she said, her voice carrying both admiration and thoughtfulness. "They do not rely on fear or power, yet they shape events in ways empires cannot. Perhaps this is what I have been missing for centuries, the understanding that true strength lies in courage and clarity, not domination." Ethan nodded. "That is humanity. We endure, we adapt, and we act according to principles. We do not seek to dominate, but we cannot be underestimated. Courage, intelligence, and unity are our greatest strengths. That is why we thrive." The matriarch regarded him for a long moment, her multiple eyes reflecting a depth of contemplation that had been absent before. She recognized that the humans had proven something extraordinary, a species that could influence the galaxy not through fear or force, but through courage, ingenuity, and the unwavering application of their principles. As the orbital station rotated silently around the Virelian homeworld, Ethan realized the significance of their achievements. Humanity had not only survived an alien empire, it had altered perceptions, influenced policy, and demonstrated the power of principle over fear. Across the galaxy, civilizations would remember that the humans were not merely small, fragile, or insignificant. They were formidable, not in ways measured by weaponry, but in ways that mattered most: courage, intelligence, and resilience. In the days that followed, the matriarch began implementing reforms inspired by human principles. Policies of fear were replaced with strategies of collaboration. Soldiers were trained to think critically and act decisively. Commanders were encouraged to consider alternatives rather than blindly obey tradition. And throughout it all, the humans remained advisors, guiding, observing, and offering insight while never seeking domination. Ethan understood the long-term impact of their presence. Humanity had proven a truth that could not be ignored. Even in a galaxy ruled by empires, technology, and power, the choices, principles, and courage of a single species could shape history itself. They had altered not only the outcome of battles, but the philosophy of leadership, the methods of strategy, and the perception of strength across the stars. One night, as the matriarch stood beside him watching the stars, she spoke softly. "Your people have shown me that courage can achieve what fear cannot, that intelligence can accomplish what weapons cannot, and that principle can endure where domination fails. I will remember this lesson for as long as I live. Ethan smiled, the faintest curve of satisfaction on his face. And the galaxy will remember humanity, not because we seek power, but because we act with courage, clarity, and resilience. That is the true measure of our strength. In that quiet moment, the stars stretched endlessly before them, and the galaxy itself seemed to acknowledge the presence of a species that had altered its course. Humanity had proven itself capable of reshaping empires, influencing civilizations, and demonstrating that true strength lay not in fear or weapons, but in courage, intelligence, and the unyielding spirit to endure and adapt. The Virelian Empire had been transformed. The matriarch had been challenged and enlightened. The humans had endured, thrived, and proven that even in the vast, unpredictable galaxy, their principles were as formidable as any weapon. And from that day forward, the galaxy would see humanity not as a minor species, but as one capable of reshaping history itself, fearless, clever, and unstoppable in ways that mattered most. The stars continued to shine, silent witnesses to the truth that had been revealed. Courage, ingenuity, and unwavering principle were forces that could not be ignored, and humanity had proven that they were masters of all three. The galaxy had witnessed the rise of a species that would forever leave its mark, not through conquest, but through the enduring power of the human spirit.